Excuse me, I did not give you permission. Turn that camera off right now. You are working for me, do you understand?
You drive for a living and you think you get an opinion? Sir, I just need you to keep your voice down. This is a shared ride. Everyone in this car works for people like me. Including you. Dad, please euro. No. Let them watch. Let everyone watch. The dashcam kept rolling. The passenger in the back seat had spent the last 4 minutes narrating, for an audience of 11,000 people watching live, exactly why the man driving the car had no business having opinions about anything. He was 34, he had built 2 companies before he was 30, and he wanted his followers to understand precisely what kind of person ends up behind the wheel of someone else's ride-share at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The driver had not raised his voice. He had not looked in the rearview mirror more than the job required. He had simply driven, hands at 10 and 2, while a man half his age performed contempt for a phone screen. What the passenger did not know what almost no one in that car knew was that the algorithm flagging his own company's fraud detection system, the one his engineering team had spent 8 months trying to patch without breaking user retention, had been written 5 years earlier by the man now absorbing his insults in total silence. Was Silas Cade about to learn exactly who he'd been talking to? If you're the kind of person who believes quiet people are usually the most dangerous ones in the room, hit subscribe before we go any further. This story earns it. Marcus Reyes had been driving for 11 months when the ride request came in for a Tuesday night pickup outside a rooftop bar in the financial district. He didn't recognize the name on the app. Silas Cade meant nothing to him, the way most of his passengers meant nothing to him beyond a 5-star rating and a destination address. Marcus had learned, over 11 months, to keep his curiosity switched off. It made the job easier. People talked in the back seat the way people talk in elevators and waiting rooms, saying things they'd never say if they thought anyone was actually listening, and Marcus had trained himself not to listen. He drove. He nodded when nodding was expected. He kept the temperature at 68 degrees because the data said 68 degrees produced the fewest complaints, and complaints were the only thing that mattered in a job with no floor beneath it. He was 46 years old. He had a daughter named Priya, 9 years old, who was asleep by the time most of his shifts ended, and a routine that had not changed in 11 months. Drive until midnight, sleep until Priya woke up, get her to school, sleep 2 more hours, pick her up, make dinner, drive again. His ex-wife had moved to Denver 2 years earlier for a job that made sense for her and impossible for the custody arrangement they'd built their lives around, and Marcus had made the decision, without much internal debate, that he would rather have Priya full-time and rebuild his income from nothing than have half of her and keep the career he'd already walked away from once. Because there had been a career. Most of his passengers assumed, correctly, that a man driving for a living at 46 had probably always driven for a living, or had lost something along the way. A business, a marriage, a court case, the specifics didn't matter to them. They rarely asked, and when they did ask, Marcus gave them a short, true, incomplete answer. He used to work in software, and now he drove. It was accurate. It was also the smallest possible fraction of the truth, and Marcus preferred it that way. The full version required explaining a company called Verity Systems, which Marcus had co-founded at 29 with a business partner named Owen Bell, a man with considerably more charisma than technical sense and a gift for convincing rooms full of investors that the future had already been decided in Verity's favor. Verity built fraud detection architecture. The invisible layer of code that watches transaction patterns and decides, in milliseconds, which purchases look like a stolen card and which look like an ordinary Tuesday. Marcus had written the original detection model himself, the mathematics underneath it, the logic that let the system learn without becoming so aggressive it started declining legitimate customers out of overcaution. It was the kind of work that never got noticed unless it failed, which was, Marcus had always thought, the purest kind of engineering. There was a euro, invisible when it worked, catastrophic when it didn't. Then his wife at the time, Elena, was diagnosed with a condition that required a specialist 3 states away and a level of ongoing care that made a founder's unpredictable schedule impossible to sustain. Owen had offered to buy out Marcus's shares at a price that was fair by any legal standard and generous by the standard of men who wanted something badly enough to make sure the paperwork moved fast. Marcus had signed without negotiating. He'd needed the certainty more than he'd needed the upside, and certainty was the one thing Owen's offer guaranteed. 2 years later, Elena's treatment had worked, their marriage had not survived the strain of the years in between, and Verity Systems had been acquired by a company called Northbridge Analytics for a number large enough to make the business press describe Owen Bell as a visionary. Marcus read about the acquisition on his phone, parked outside Priya's school, waiting for the bell. He had felt something distant and almost clinical about it, the way you might feel reading about weather in a city you used to live in. He closed the article and went inside to pick up his daughter. He had not spoken to Owen Bell since the sale closed. There had been a brief, cordial email exchange in the first year. €, Owen checking in the careful language of a man managing a relationship rather than continuing one, and Marcus responding in kind, both of them understanding without saying so that the friendship, such as it had been a function of the company and had ended when the company changed hands. Marcus did not carry any particular anger about this. He had walked away from Verity with his eyes open, and he understood that the version of Owen who wired him a fair price for his shares and the version of Owen who later stood on stages describing Verity's origin story in the first-person singular were, in some practical sense, the same man behaving exactly as consistently as Marcus should have expected. What Marcus had not fully accounted for, in the years since, was how completely his own name would disappear from the story. He had assumed some residue of it would remain a footnote in a trade publication, a mention in an anniversary retrospective, something. Instead, as Verity became Northbridge's flagship acquisition and Owen became the kind of founder who got invited to speak at conferences about vision and resilience, Marcus Reyes became, functionally, a person who did not exist in the public record of the thing he had built. He noticed this the way you notice a light left on in a room you no longer use. Present, faintly troubling, not urgent enough to address. He drove instead. He picked Priya up at 3. He made dinner, most nights something simple that she'd help choose from a rotating list of 4 or 5 meals she actually liked, and some evenings, after her homework was finished and the dishes were done, they sat at the kitchen table with the circuit kit her mother had sent for her 8th birthday. And Marcus taught her, slowly, the same patient logic he'd once poured into code that now processed $11 billion a year for a company that had never once acknowledged his name. Silas Cade climbed into the back seat of Marcus's car already midway through a sentence, phone raised, ring light clipped to the top of it, narrating to a live stream audience that had been building all evening as he moved from the bar to the car. He was 34. Dressed in the specific uniform of a man who wanted you to notice he wasn't trying expensive fabric style to look incidental and he had the loose, unguarded energy of someone 3 drinks past his usual filter. "We're getting in the car now," Silas said to his phone, "and I want you all to understand something about rideshare drivers. This is not a career. This is what happens to people who didn't figure it out." Marcus pulled away from the curb and said nothing. He had heard variations of this sentiment perhaps 40 times in 11 months, delivered with 40 different levels of self-awareness, and he had developed a simple internal rule. The passenger's opinion of him cost him nothing unless he let it. He kept the car at the speed limit and watched the road. "You're not even going to say anything?" Silas said, angling the phone toward the rearview mirror. "See, this is the thing. Total passivity. This guy will drive me 20 minutes for $11 and he will not say one word about it because he has accepted that this is what his life is." "Sir, I just need you to keep your voice down," Marcus said, evenly. "This is a shared ride and I have another pickup after this." "Oh, he speaks," Silas said, delighted, to his audience. "Everyone say hi to Euro." He glanced at the app Euro, Marcus. "Marcus, tell everyone what you did before this. Everyone loves a fallen from grace story. I'd rather just drive, if that's alright. See, that's the thing though. Everyone in this car works for people like me. Including you. This whole app, this whole gig economy, it exists because guys like me build the platforms and guys like you euro. He paused for effect, savoring the audience he could feel building in the comment stream beneath him. Euro, guys like you fill the seats. That's the ecosystem. That's just how it works. Marcus did not respond. He checked his mirror, changed lanes, and kept driving. In the front passenger seat, a second passenger a woman Marcus's app identified only as Renata, who had been picked up 2 minutes before Silas at a shared stop, part of the pooled ride. Sat with her arms folded, staring hard out the window, radiating the specific discomfort of a stranger trapped in someone else's cruelty with no clean way to exit it. She was maybe 25, headphones around her neck rather than in her ears, clearly having decided the situation required witnessing rather than escaping into music. She glanced once at Marcus in the mirror. Marcus gave no sign he'd noticed. You know what my company does? Silas continued, warming into it now, sensing an audience and a captive target in the same enclosed space. We build the fraud detection layer for about 40% of mid-size retail platforms in this country. You've used systems I built without knowing it. Every time your card doesn't get declined at checkout, that's people like me, working 80-hour weeks, making the internet actually function. Meanwhile he gestured expansively at the interior of the car, at Marcus, at the entire arrangement of the evening. Meanwhile this is the alternative. This is what happens if you don't build anything. You just drive people around who did. Silas, Renata said quietly, maybe just let the ride happen. I'm making a point, Silas said, not unkindly, waving a hand at her the way you'd wave at a fly. It's not personal. It's just true. Marcus, be honest with the people watching. What did you do before this? Some kind of tech thing that didn't work out, right? I can always tell. Marcus met his eyes in the mirror for the first time since the ride began. I wrote fraud detection software, he said. For about 6 years. Something flickered across Silas's face. Not recognition yet, just the small readjustment of a man realizing his target had spoken a full sentence with content in it. No kidding, he said, recovering his tone quickly, already reaching for the joke. See, and now look at where that got you. That's kind of the whole point I'm making, actually. Thank you for proving it. The company was called Verity Systems, Marcus said. He kept his voice at exactly the volume it had been the entire ride. We were acquired by Northbridge Analytics about 4 years ago. The car went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the radio, which had not been playing. Renata turned fully in her seat. Silas's phone, still recording, still streaming to an audience that had just swelled past 14,000 viewers as the algorithm rewarded rising engagement, hung slightly lower in his hand. Northbridge bought Verity, Silas said slowly, and rebuilt the whole detection stack under my team. That's that's literally the platform I run now. That's my platform. I know, Marcus said. I wrote the base architecture your platform is still running on. The core detection model, before Northbridge's team layered their improvements on top of it. If you've ever wondered why the false positive rate on your legacy accounts is almost exactly half what your newer client integrations run at, that's the difference between a model built from first principles and a model built to hit a acquisition timeline. If you want to see exactly how deep this goes, stay with us, because Silas Cade was about to learn something about the man in the driver's seat that would change considerably more than the next 20 minutes of his evening. Silas laughed, but it came out thin, missing the confidence of 30 seconds earlier. That's okay, that's a big claim to just casually drop in a rideshare. You wrote the architecture for a system that processes $11 billion a year in transaction volume, and now you drive for $11 a ride. Yes, Marcus said simply. Why? The word came out sharper than Silas intended, less performance now and more genuine confusion, the ring light on his phone still glowing but his attention no longer on the audience at all. My daughter needed me to be somewhere predictable at 3 p.m. every day, Marcus said. Verity didn't have a version of the job that let me do that. Owen bought my shares. I signed. It was a good deal at the time, for reasons that had nothing to do with the technology. That's not €1. I looked into Verity's founding story when we did the integration deal, Silas said, and something in his posture had changed now, leaning forward slightly rather than lounging back. There were 2 founders listed. Owen Bell and a name I actually don't remember, because it was Owen's face on every article about it. That would be me, Marcus said. M. Reyes is on the original patent filings. Marcus Reyes. Owen was better at rooms full of investors than I was. I was better at the thing the investors were actually paying for. Renata had gone very still in the front seat, watching this unfold with the specific fascination of someone realizing they were witnessing something they'd be telling people about for years. Prove it, Silas said, and there was an edge to it now, something defensive rising underneath the disbelief. Not €1, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, genuinely, if you're telling me you're the Reyes on the Verity patents, I need more than a name in a car. I don't have anything to prove to you, Marcus said, still perfectly level. I'm not asking you to believe me. You asked what I did before this. I told you. What you do with that is entirely your business. No, but €1, Silas exhaled, ran a hand through his hair, glanced at his phone as though remembering, with visible discomfort, that it was still recording, still streaming, that the version of this conversation now living in front of 14,000 people had shifted considerably from the one he'd set out to broadcast. If this is true, and I'm not saying it isn't, but if it's true, you built something worth €1. Northbridge paid 9 figures for Verity. You should not be driving a rideshare. Something about that math doesn't work. The math worked exactly the way it was supposed to, Marcus said. I traded equity for time. My daughter is 9. She was 5 when I made that trade. I don't regret it, and I'm not looking for anyone to feel sorry about it, least of all someone who spent the last 10 minutes telling an audience of strangers that people who drive for a living didn't figure it out. The silence that followed had weight to it, the specific silence of a person recognizing, in real time, that the story he was performing had quietly become a different story than the one he thought he was telling. Silas didn't say much for the rest of the ride. He'd stopped narrating to the phone somewhere around the mention of the patent filings, though he hadn't ended the stream €1. Marcus suspected, correctly, that ending it now would draw more attention to the moment than simply letting it run out naturally. The comments section, which Marcus couldn't see but Renata could, had turned entirely against Silas within about 90 seconds of the exchange, the way audiences do when a performance collapses in front of them and they realize they've been watching something uglier than entertainment. When the car pulled up outside Silas's building, he sat for a moment without moving to open the door. Can I ask you something, he said, quieter now, the performance entirely drained out of his voice, off the stream. He turned the phone face down on his knee, the ring light throwing a dim glow up at the car's ceiling instead of at either of them. Why didn't you say something sooner? I was going for 10 minutes. You just took it. Because it wasn't going to change anything for me either way, Marcus said. You were going to think what you were going to think about a man driving a car. I've had that conversation enough times to know arguing about it doesn't move anyone. I only said something because you asked a direct question, and I don't see the use in lying about who I am to make someone else more comfortable. That's €1, Silas shook his head slowly. That's a better answer than I deserve tonight. Probably, Marcus said, without malice. Silas got out. He stood on the curb for a second, phone still face down, watching the car pull away, and Renata, in the front seat, finally exhaled the breath she seemed to have been holding for the last several minutes of the ride. That was the single most satisfying thing I have ever watched happen to a stranger, she said. I didn't do it to satisfy anyone, Marcus said, pulling back into traffic. I know, she said. That's what made it satisfying. The clip did not stay contained to Silas's stream. Within 6 hours it had been re-uploaded, captioned, and stitched into a dozen different reaction videos, most of them centering on the moment Silas's confidence visibly cracked and the specific stillness with which Marcus had delivered the fact of who he was. By the following afternoon, someone had cross-referenced the Verity patent filings and confirmed, publicly, that an M. Reyes was indeed listed as co-inventor on the original fraud detection architecture, alongside Owen Bell. Business journalists who had spent 4 years writing profiles of Owen as a self-made visionary began quietly reaching out to Marcus's old university, to former Verity employees, to anyone who could speak to what the company had actually looked like in its earliest years, before the version of the story that made it into press releases had calcified into consensus.